everybody loves grades, right? No. I'm not sure anybody loves grades. I'm not sure teachers like grades. I'm not sure students like grades. I remember, the summer before starting as a professor, just really trying to grapple with the history of where they came from and why we have them, and reading some histories that I'm not sure are true, but they're certainly what we have documented, that there was a tutor at Cambridge University around the time that statistics was emerging in the 19th century as a powerful way of dealing with variation in industrial practices. And that tutor just said, well, what if school was like industry and we could actually deal with variation and tolerance, measure student performance? And that was it. Like that one idea back in, 1870 something, that brought us to where we are today. And so that history seems really important because we haven't always done it this way, right? We've always thought about teaching in diverse ways, and it hasn't always involved measurement of learning. And then secondly, I think, we just have to use that history to recognize what problem we think we're solving with it and remember that history. And when I think about grades, I think about it as really kind of trying to solve two distinct problems. One is problems of motivation, right? How do we help students that are not excited about learning some material to learn?
Right.
Grades are a blunt instrument to provide some extrinsic motivation. It's sort of a scary, though, and unjust kind of instrument. Think about what it means to say, I will give you this grade if you do this thing. It actually means the opposite, which is I'm going to punish you if you don't.
Right.
And what does that punishment mean? Taking away opportunity, taking away a sense of self-efficacy. I mean, there's just so many downsides to that kind of punishment model of summative assessment. And then the other problem that grades try to solve are a broader systemic thing, which is selection in society. How do we choose which people get which resources? And the idea that grades are for helping decide who gets into college, or decide who gets a job, or decide who gets some scholarship. To me, when you start talking about those issues, then you just have to get into things like, wait, why are we even deciding? Why doesn't everybody just get to go to college? Why doesn't everybody just have the resources they need to go to school? We've done that for K-12. Why are we not doing that for 2-year colleges? Why are we not doing that for 4-year colleges? At some level, you might draw the line and say, well, not everybody gets to have the job they want. Not everybody gets to work at Google. Not everybody gets to do some things. And you might have to have some other criteria too. Are grades the best measure for deciding which of those scarce resources people get and who doesn't get them? Not even sure they're the best measure for that too. If you know anything about psychometrics, you know that none of us are really grading all that carefully or well. And we really shouldn't be trusting many of those measurements for anything. So when you take all of those critiques of grades and you really just set aside that motivation to select, and you recognize the problem of motivating students, well, then just find better ways of motivating students. Find ways that are more positive and constructive and asset-based rather than punishment-based. And if you really have to help people select, we have other models for that. We can do letters of recommendation and portfolios, and we can do interviews. And there's a lot of things that work relatively well. They have their own caveats. But we sort of just discount them because we've just accepted that back in the 1870s, a tutor had an idea about statistics. It just seems like the wrong rationale for doing this practice.
Yeah, one of the things that I know you've also read, so K. Anders Ericsson's idea of deliberate practice and developing expertise and skill acquisition. When I was reading through those studies, it really resonated with me and really made me question grades because, okay, if we're going with the idea that in order to develop expertise, you have to put in a significant amount of deliberate practice on something. Okay, I totally buy into that as a musician. I had to put in tens of thousands of hours to become good at it. But if kids are able to go home and work on a computer, and some kids are able to go home and they don't have internet, they don't have a device, that's going to create a huge difference in the amount of time that they can spend in deliberate practice. So if I were to grade based off of quality or based off of like a curve or whatever, any approach I take, whoever is able to go home and engage with this more is going to learn at a faster pace than somebody who does not have access to the technology at home. And so putting a grade on quality, whatever, it becomes an ethical problem that I was just like, all right, if you are engaged in class and you are actively learning and trying to improve yourself, you get an A. If you are setting your own goals and whatever those steps are, whether it's smaller or larger than the people around you, doesn't matter, just as long as you are trying to learn. What recommendations would you give to other educators or have you taken in terms of your own approach to grades? Because we still got to assign them at some point.
We do. And I speak from a privileged position as a tenured professor where if I don't assign them or I just assign them to mean something that's what I want them to mean, really nothing's going to happen to me. If I don't assign them, something might happen to students. They might not sustain a scholarship. They might not be able to get into the graduate school that they want. So clearly within the system, I have to assign something. But what they mean can be something that I decide. An example would be in this last quarter, which we just wrapped up this past week. During this pandemic, it's just not been a time that I've wanted to create the kind of stress that comes with grades and summative assessments. And I just decided to remove that stress. So I just said, infinite resubmits, infinite regrades. Anytime you want feedback and you want to do better on an assignment, just let me know and I will regrade or my TA will regrade. And the result was, what should happen in most teaching and learning, which is that I just give a lot of feedback. Students practice a lot. They learn what they got wrong and what they got right. And they start isolating which aspects of their knowledge they want to improve. There's still that sort of incentive component built into the class because I'm giving a grade at the end of it. But it just meant that students were spending a lot more time engaging with the mistakes they'd made and the things they got right. And I was spending a lot more time just giving feedback. And that felt really good. I think the result was that 90% of the students in my class left with a 4.0. Nothing will happen. Somebody can accuse me of grade inflation and I will just tell them that, well, everybody learned a lot. They did the right thing.
Right. One of the quotes on one of the posts that you did about grades is your goal for some to succeed and some to fail? Are you still operating with a belief that only some students are capable of learning what you're teaching, and grades are supposed to detect who those are? Or is your goal for everyone to learn? That quote, it totally resonated with me. That makes a lot of sense. I wish more people had the approach that you're outlining with the infinite resubmits and getting feedback and iterating on things and whatnot, because it models what we do outside of these formalized spaces. One of the quotes that a professor mentioned in passing was, what do we do with students who take 16 weeks to learn something in a 14-week course? They're able to develop complete understanding of this concept in 16 weeks, but we have to assign a grade at the end of the 14th week. So what happens with those students? And that just was oh yeah, we can't just constrain learning into these predetermined slots of time and expect everyone to succeed within that.
No, of course not. And I mean, it goes back to that experience I had in my pre-algebra class, learning basic on my Texas Instruments TIA-82 calculator. Had somebody told me that I only had 10 weeks to learn that programming language and to change that version of Tetris that I was trying to make run faster, I wouldn't have succeeded. It wouldn't have happened, right? I didn't have a teacher to help me do it. I was doing it all on my own too. So it was just going to take a long time. I think I spent the entire summer just rereading that manual for the calculator just over and over and over again, tinkering with things and trying to make the game work better that I was trying to change. But all of the constraints that come with time and grades and other things, that's what would have broken that model. One more example of this. When I was in college, I took a required statistics for engineers course because at the time when I was there, our CS degree was in the College of Engineering and I had to take all of the engineering requirements. So stat, electrical fundamentals, physics, and all of these other random things that had nothing to do with computer science. But in the stats course, because they were teaching, 10,000 engineers a year, they didn't have enough stats faculty for that. They didn't have enough stats TAs for it. So they just did a mastery learning model. They had a sequence of lessons, you would read them, and then they just had a pile of 20 versions of a quiz for every single one of those lessons. You just kept taking the quiz until you passed it, and not only passed it, but could explain why each answer that you gave was right to the TA. And once you demonstrated mastery on them, you were done with the course and you became a TA. And it just led to this really interesting, productive learning context of everybody's working hard to understand this material. The moment they do understand it, they can help others understand it. The pool of instructors grows over time. The people who take 2 weeks to master the material, they're done in 2 weeks and they can help out with others learning. And those that might take 10 weeks, it just might take 10 weeks, and that's okay. And then the beautiful thing was, if it took longer than 10 weeks, when somebody got to the end of the quarter, they would just let you retake the class, replace the old grade with a new grade. And if it took you 20 weeks to get to that 4.0, then you did. So everybody got a 4.0 in that class every single time and eventually mastered that material.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 73, which is titled Vulnerability, Reflection, and CS Education with Amy Ko.